There's no coming back from watching Charlie Kirk slowly uncork his true feelings about Israel, if those are his true feelings. That would have destroyed the American support for Israel. That would have entirely alienated the entire right wing under 25. Until we feel conclusive evidence, which is not likely to even really ever happen for most of us, we should be asking questions and seeking the truth.
Ian Carroll recently weighed evidence that Israel ordered the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and in this clip, he goes piece by piece of various pieces of information that he believes points in that direction. And I have a good idea we're going to agree and disagree with parts of this, but also I want to make it clear that it is appropriate to seek the truth and to ask questions and to question the original narrative that the government gives, as long as you are actually pursuing truth and justice for the victims, and not because you just have a particular political agenda or axe to grind. So let's get into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
So, the Israel thing, we're going to unpack that a little first. It's not the only angle we're going to unpack, but it's context that kind of comes before the day of the shooting. So, Charlie Kirk is kind of the caricature of the right-wing Zionist influencer. And he built the most massive, influential, impressive platform in Turning Point USA, largely on Zionist monetary backing, but also on blood, sweat, tears, hard work. Like, there's no understating how absolutely impressive Turning Point is as an organization and how impactful it is. And I was saying this to my friend the other day that even if you're not on the right, even if you don't agree with Charlie's opinions and perspectives, I would hope that all sane, moderate people in our nation right now would understand that we want young people involved in politics, and we want young people thinking critically about their future and about the nation. And probably no one has done more for the youth getting engaged in politics than Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, I agree with all this, especially on the conservative side. If you ask me, who are the top conservative influencers, Charlie was top 3, if you ask me. I think only maybe Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson were bigger names in impacting and moving society in the direction of the right. You could maybe say Jack Posobiec or Benny Johnson. There's a few others in the mix there, but I think he was that prominent and that influential, especially when it came to engaging young people. And this is just apparent. I believe he really is one of the top conservative influencers in the United States. So this is a big deal. His assassination is a big deal. He was a very prominent personality in that world, and you can say that whether you agree with him or disagree with him.
And the power of Turning Point and Charlie's platform as an influence, especially over young conservative people in America, cannot be understated. Like, it cannot.
Agreed.
And so when the Zionists that backed him all the way, that built Turning Point USA underneath him and around him with their money, when they start to hear things like Charlie Kirk saying, "Oh, you guys probably aren't going to have audio from the screen because I'm not sharing tabs. You're going to have to deal with it. You don't need the audio on these things for the most part. You kind of do need the audio. Fuck." So Charlie Kirk was saying we should release all the Epstein files, right? But that's not it. I'm sure that you guys have seen his interview with Megyn Kelly, where he opens with the words, "I'm terrified." And then they go back and forth talking about how they have received some real pushback from sort of the donor class, that, like, it just feels sketchy. And Harrison, this is the video that Harrison was referring to in this kind of original tweet and conversation. He did a really great stream on InfoWars about it. He was referring to this conversation between Charlie and Megyn, where they were kind of going back and forth, and they just felt scared. It felt weird and sketchy.
All right, so it's important to note he never said in that interview with Megyn Kelly, and I went back and looked at it because some of my commenters recommended me to do it, that he was scared for his life from the direction of Israel. That allegation comes from unnamed sources that I believe Harrison Smith put forward and said, something like a tweet maybe about a month ago that something like, I'm not going to name names, but, Charlie Kirk told me that he's afraid that if he betrays Israel, he's going to be killed. That's not part of that video. I just want to be clear about that, provide clarification, because that's a narrative out there right now. But I don't know that that's substantiated by Charlie himself. Now, I'm not saying that can't be true no matter what, but there's no film of Charlie saying that. And when he had that clip about him asking for the release of the Epstein files, there's no more mainstream talking point than that from the right. And it's been that way for 5 years. Even people influential bucked Trump on this, pushed back against Trump when Trump covered up the Epstein files and refused to release them and made up a farcical narrative about how it's a Democratic hoax and it's boring. And hey, look at this grand jury testimony. Don't look there. Here's an interview with Ghislaine Maxwell where we don't push back. All of that mainstream talking point. In no part does he say that, Epstein was working for Mossad. He never asserts that in any footage I can see or questions Israel's culpability in influencing Epstein, which we've talked about a lot here. I buy generally the narrative that that's the most plausible scenario, that Israel had Epstein as an asset, but I haven't seen that from Charlie.
He was talking about really highly intellectual critiques of Jewish donors in the American left funding cultural Marxism and things that degrade American values. And he was not he was totally not shy about talking about it. This is more recent clip, but he, with his knowledge and political expertise, if this man starts criticizing Israel in an earnest way, in an unfiltered way, he has the wherewithal and the political understanding to really open some cans of worms. And
that part I agree with, the last part he said, but in the clip he's showing here, and I've seen this clip too, Charlie Kirk complains that Jewish American donors are influencing anti-Christian schemes that do those things, that support cultural Marxism, etc., that Ian just said. But at no point, again, does he complain about Israel, causing that financially and bankrolling that financially. He's saying Jewish Americans, and that's a little bit different than saying Israel has financed that. And, getting in trouble with Israel for, exposing the proclivities of many Jewish American donors, especially those of us that don't conflate Israel and Judaism in general and Jewish donors. And yeah, you can say, there are a lot of Jewish donors that donate to pro-Israel causes and causes connected with Israel, but it's certainly not the same to say that Charlie Kirk complained about Israel financing those sorts of things in the United States. That's not in the clip at all. And I do think that's an important difference to distinguish here. Just want to note it, but I think that there is a mistake in Ian if he conflates the two there.
I really don't think you can understate how dangerous that would be to Israel if he were to start criticizing them openly.
Agree with that. That I agree with. I just haven't seen much evidence that he has openly criticized Israel. Openly. Not much at all, actually. He was a diehard Zionist. The conservative movement in general has been moving away from, absolute support for Israel. You can see this in people like Megyn Kelly that are starting to have, Marjorie Taylor Greene on the show talking about this a little bit. Steve Bannon, Candace and Tucker moved away from, unmitigated support for Israel a long time. But that's where the headwinds are going regardless of this happening. But I haven't seen much from Charlie saying that. I've seen a lot of people alleging that, but a lot of these clips to me don't really portray that.
Who's starting all the wars? He was talking about it. Very real segment about war with Iran and just being not about it and talking about how it's good for Israel. It's not good for us.
That is true. Apparently he had a personal conversation with Trump urging him not to enact regime change in Iran, and maybe not even to bomb Iran. I think stories differ there. But again, I don't think that that's condemning Israel. That was looking out for U.S. foreign policy interests. I know that conflicted with what Israel wanted, certainly so. But in no part did he say, Benjamin Netanyahu's a monster. There's a genocide in Gaza. This Israel first mentality is toxic. I've never seen anything like that from him. Talking Trump out of bombing Iran is not necessarily just, going against Israel. It was to an extent, but he's never openly criticized Israel. And a lot of people that were generally pro-Israel in the United States and the Trump coalition were against that bombing, by the way, were otherwise pretty pro-Israel. So that's another thing.
This must be a redo of the same conversation. Quote, Jewish donors have been the number one funding mechanism of radical open borders, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies. Like, that is literally like a Groyper Nazi talking point when people want to smear that topic and don't want to talk about it.
That is true. People don't want to talk about that, but at no point is that Israel. He's talking about Jewish donors in the United States. It's not the same as, talking about Israel and what Israel finances domestically in the United States.
And it's like, I didn't know that Charlie was talking about these things. I wasn't watching Charlie's streams. I was just characterizing him and kind of talking shit on Twitter, kind of like a dumbass. And I wasn't actually paying attention to the words he was saying. And he, when you actually go back and look, he was clearly changing his perspective. And on Epstein, like, quote, this is no longer to speculation. First of all, the evidence that shows that Epstein was a creation of either Mossad, Israeli intelligence, American intelligence, etc. He was going in on the obvious fact that Jeffrey Epstein was a creation of Israel. And
interesting. This clip I haven't seen, and I'll admit this is compelling if he actually does even flirt with the notion that Epstein was a product of Mossad, Israeli intelligence, or American intelligence. That points more toward, contempt for Israel, or at least floating the possibility that Israel had this guy by the strings and was conducting an operation through him. This is something I'll have to consider. I'm going to take a look at this video and make sure it aligns with that. I hadn't seen this clip. I'd only seen clips of Charlie Kirk talking about how, Epstein might be an intelligence operative, not necessarily Mossad or Israeli. I think that's more compelling if he was starting to talk about that for the first time recently. That's more persuasive to me. I'll admit that right off the bat. I'm going to look into this.
Worked for Israel via Ehud Barak and Ghislaine Maxwell. And so these are very taboo topics in general, but coming from their guy, the one that has built the new American young right-wing coalition with thousands of chapters all across America on college and high school campuses. And then his very last episode is literally a podcast with Ben Shapiro, where he just straight up says I feel like we should be able to criticize Israel, and goes into it. And dude, Ben's face is just, it's not good.
All right, so I don't agree with that interpretation of this clip, which I've also seen. And again, I urge all my viewers to watch this. In this clip, all Charlie Kirk does is ask Ben Shapiro the question, should we believe everything we're hearing in the media about Israel? Is it proper to question the narratives we're getting about Israel? That's all he says. And hey, maybe that's enough for you to believe and go with the narrative that he's turned against Israel. But to me, it's not. He had to have known, being smart enough, that Ben Shapiro was just going to answer with classic Zionist apologetics. That's what Ben Shapiro specializes in. That wasn't particularly condemning to Israel at all in the clip that I saw here. He was just asking a question, teeing it off for Ben, maybe even thinking that Ben's going to knock it out of the park and be pro-Israel. I just don't have the same interpretation of this one Ian does, and this one isn't compelling to me at all. Again, though, I admit the previous one was, and I'm going to look more into it.
And so that sort of, okay, here's the other Harrison stream. If you're more interested in what Harrison was thinking when he wrote that original tweet and all that, he elaborates in it in this clip from InfoWars, August 7th of 2025. And there's a post that he put up to explain it, although honestly, he doesn't exactly add a lot of context. But so it kind of builds this narrative, and X did all that. Like, I was not trying to stoke that. I wasn't trying to get in and like blame Israel immediately, although I did, fire off shots this morning, so to speak. But this narrative built on X, largely on its own. Put it all together. Sorry, guys, I forgot how to use the streaming stuff. It's been a long time. And ultimately, like, there's a narrative to put there. It tracks and it comes together.
I wouldn't really say that. I would say there's some circumstantial pieces that people point to. To me, some are more compelling than others. The one I talked about was. A lot of the others are not compelling at all. If you want me to be honest, there was no more, hardcore supporter of Zionism in the United States and on the conservative movement, especially among young people, than Charlie Kirk. I haven't seen major evidence he was turning away. He might have been floating with the tides to some extent, to the degree that Megyn Kelly has been, asking questions of guests that aren't exactly on the same wavelength of being Ben Shapiro or Mark Levin on Israel, but nothing more than that so far to me.
And then you start to think about, like, what are the question marks here? Like, what factors make that story actually play? And the real question is, what was Charlie actually saying behind the scenes about Israel? What was he actually being told by his donors and by any Israelis or AIPAC people or, his Zionist funders behind the scenes? How much did they know about his true feelings? How constrained was he feeling? Like, what was really going on back there, right? That's the real question. Basically, the question is, what did this guy that told this to Harrison, what did that guy actually hear? What did he actually know? What's really going on in the background with Charlie Kirk? And today, the Gray Zone published this article, Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil. Charlie Kirk refused Netanyahu funding offer, was frightened by pro-Israel forces before death, friend reveals. Now, in the article, they do not disclose the identity of their source. And they don't, as far as I saw, disclose whether this is the same source as talked to Harrison. I don't think we know that. But it very much seems to corroborate Harrison's claim. In the weeks leading up to his September 10th assassination, Kirk had come to loathe the Israeli leader, regarding him as a bully, the source said. Kirk was disgusted by what he witnessed inside the Trump administration, where Netanyahu sought to personally dictate the president's personal decisions and weaponize Israeli assets like billionaire donor Miriam Adelson to keep the White House firmly under its thumb. Like, according to Kirk's friend, who also enjoyed access to President Donald Trump in his inner circle, Kirk strongly warned Trump last June against bombing Iran on Israel's behalf. Quote, Charlie was the only person who did that, they said, recalling how Trump barked at him in response and angrily shut down the conversation. The source believes the incident confirmed in Kirk's mind that the president of the United States had fallen under the control of a malign foreign power and was leading his own country into a series of disastrous conflicts. I mean, it's an anonymous source, but like the Gray Zone, they don't fuck around.
Yeah, I agree with them on that. I love the Gray Zone. There's basically no more trustworthy dissident foreign policy enterprise than the Gray Zone. Max Blumenthal's a hero as far as I'm concerned, so is Aaron Mate. But here's what I'll say about this. This is an unnamed source, not saying that means to discard what it says or that it's untruthful, but I hope this unnamed source would tell the same thing to Charlie Kirk's family, for his widow, for the sake of his two young children, that this was the case too, such that it can be investigated, and that this friend shares that information with his family too, so they can get to the bottom of it. You know, whether the authorities care about this, if it's Israel or not, I think we can deduce that. You know, the authorities will sweep it under the rug if it embarrasses Israel in any way, but at the very least, close friends and family should know about this concern. If this is true from this unnamed source, that's what I hope would happen. So this one is more compelling to me than a lot of the other things. I know it's an unnamed source. You know, good journalists protect their sources for obvious reasons, but I hope his family would get to know this too.
Like, I trust them more than the mainstream media for sure.
Agreed.
The following month, Kirk had become the target of a sustained private campaign of intimidation and free-floating fury by wealthy and powerful allies of Netanyahu, figures he described in an interview as Jewish leaders and stakeholders. Quote, he was afraid of them, the source emphasized. At TPUSA, the rift with Israel widened, and, it goes on. He had Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith on, and a lot more open conversation, and some really legit shit was said. Some real truth was thrown down. And
that's true. That event had a debate between Dave Smith and Josh Hammer, in which Dave Smith, arguing against aid for Israel, got more pops than Josh Hammer, a Zionist, among young conservatives. Really surprising reaction, if you ask me, and really showing where the headwinds are going in terms of young conservatism. And Tucker Carlson got a lot of applause for saying, hey, it's not anti-Semitism to question the U.S. relationship with Israel or to criticize it. So that's true, too.
That, this is just my opinion, but in my opinion, if that was allowed to continue, if America spent the next year watching Charlie Kirk turn on the present administration in Israel, even if he maintained his sort of greater Zionist stance, and even if he maintained his greater sort of semi-Jewish Christian identity, and I don't mean that as a dig, I mean that as he literally took Sabbath. Anyways, it that would have destroyed the American support for Israel. That would have entirely alienated the entire right wing under 25 or so, right? There's no coming back from watching Charlie Kirk slowly uncork his true feelings about Israel, if those are his true feelings, like we just read. And to then watch the fallout, because there's this other thing that happens, is any time that a person that has not been critical of Israel is critical for the first time on the internet, especially if they're Jewish, or especially if they were a supporter of Israel, and they say that first negative thing, and then they experience for the first time the just slander of anti-Semitism, Nazi, you're a bigot, you far right, you crazy extremist, and you are immediately bombarded by the Hasbara propaganda attack machine.
Yeah, I believe this. Candace Owens has attested to this, and I believe her based upon what they did. They even paid preachers to slam her during their congregational services, during their preaching in their churches. They would slam Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. I don't necessarily agree with them that it would have turned all of young conservatism away from this if Charlie Kirk had turned away from this. I agree that it would have been impactful. But then I'll ask the question, why wasn't it impactful when Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens started to go against Israel? Candace Owens really before Tucker to some extent, but both of them for some time. And really, the younger conservatives are less likely to support Israel than older conservatives. So wouldn't it even be more important to turn older conservatives away from that? It seems like Candace or Tucker represent that more. Maybe they're in the process of hitting them too. I hope not. I mean, this level of violence is crazy. It's not worth endorsing, but one has to ask the question, younger conservatives are already turning against Israel. And I don't know that the impact would be as big as Ian thinks necessarily. It would have been impactful. I just don't know the degree.
Suddenly Charlie Kirk is funded by Qatar and all the other allegations get thrown out. It would have just shown it would have been the messiest, most like dumpster fire that you could ever imagine. So I just say all that to say that there is evidence. Dave Smith had legitimate criticisms. I came out very hot. You're right. Not a factual statement at the time. I said, what did I say? At the start of it, it was the internet already figured out who was the most likely culprit.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's true. Even if you're looking at conservative circles before today, one of the prevailing narratives is this is obviously a trans shooter. Obviously. Based on, the Crowder release about the etchings on the shell cases, we got a trans shooter on our hands, and doesn't seem to be that turns out to be the truth if you think the shooter they apprehended is the one, if it's the one on the video, which the likeness seems very similar to me. I'm not a forensic analyst, but it doesn't seem like this guy's trans. I'll just say he's not trans, but that was a prevailing narrative too. The Israel narrative too is among dissidents, but I don't know if it was the most likely narrative, even if you were just watching like Twitter in general.
And so it's not like there was no evidence. It's not like there is no evidence for Israel. And that is not it. That is just circumstantial context. But then we're going to actually get to the shooting and the day of the shooting and what happened. So there is like, because here's the thing. More context. A political assassination happens. One of the, like, honestly, like Charlie Kirk is a more significant political figure than 95% of Congress, right? Like, in a lot of ways, Charlie Kirk has done more in right-wing politics than basically every politician, except for like the core cabinet and like the key senators, right? And so this is a extremely high-profile political assassination.
Yeah, I totally agree with him on that. On both points there. This is probably the highest degree political assassination in the US since Martin Luther King. If you can think of another one, let me know. I mean, maybe Bobby Kennedy too. There's a few, but man, he has that kind of influence. I think that you could even argue that he is more influential in the age of digital media and independent media among his circle than maybe even Martin Luther King was. And the civil rights movement was fractured between people like King and people like Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X and Fred Hampton. There's many characters of that era. Martin Luther King was the biggest one, and his impact was enormous. His influence was enormous. So was Charlie Kirk's. I mean, this is a household name too, maybe a top 3 conservative influencer in the world in an age where there's more populists here too. I'm not saying it's a one-to-one comparison, but this is high profile. He's right about that.
It's not like he was protected by Secret Service or any of that. Like there's nuance. But in a political assassination of that magnitude, the first question is, who are the suspects? And one large group of suspects that is immediately in question every time there's a political assassination is intelligence agencies from all nations. Obviously.
Yeah.
Like, unless you were born yesterday, just read a book. If someone shoots at a large political figure, whether that's a media figure, an actual politician, a preacher, whatever, it's like, it's not always going to be an intelligence agency, but it damn well could be, right?
Yeah, or at least an organization aided by one. You have, Rafael Trujillo. You have assassination attempts on lots of figures. Soleimani, that one happened a few years ago. You have, assassination attempts on Ayman al-Zawahiri until his assassination. You had bin Laden's assassination. This is true. I mean, you should look to potential state involvement of high-profile people. That's the truth. But I don't know if that proves the Israel connection in this regard. I mean, I mostly agree with him. Like, you should ask questions about that, or at least consider that. I don't know if that alone points to that, though, in this case.
And so it's not some crazy harebrained thing to just ask, could this have been a state-sponsored intelligence agency hit job? In this case, you would normally not think to look at Israel, which is like, Charlie is like the biggest Israel supporter ever. But when you understand the circumstances and the context, they immediately become the most likely, in many ways, the only likely intelligence agency that might have had motive. And I would argue that we just talked about a lot of motive.
I don't know about that. I think even if you believe that they had motive, there's a big motive against rolling the dice on killing the most high-profile pro-Zionist young influencer in the country. I'm just going to say it. I do. I think that in an age of digital media where it's harder to hide your footprints, not saying that the deep state doesn't do this, not saying that the CIA and the NSA and the FBI don't do this, nefarious plots carried out sometimes in conjunction with Mossad, so much to the extent that Mossad and the CIA become indistinguishable to some extent. But I think it's rolling the dice hard that a whistleblower doesn't come out to expose this, a paper trail is left. and that ruining the entire U.S.-Israeli relationship forever. That's not something that I think even the state could cover up if it really gets out. That sort of thing is something that would destroy this relationship forever. And as we know now, the status quo is they have America by the throat. You know, Mearsheimer says Israel's an albatross around the neck of the United States, and we're tied to the hip of Israel. That's true. That's what they have now. They don't seem to need that much more anymore. And that's despite people like Tucker and Candace moving away from supporting Israel.
Obviously, it's not a thing that they would just do lightly. It's not a thing that depends who's doing it. Because let's be real. Israel has, shall we say, a habit of assassinating people like fucking crazy. And they have a pattern of shooting people in the neck.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. They're especially great at doing that to innocents, to women and children in Gaza by about 100,000 or more at this point, maybe more. He's right about that one.
That does not mean that they did it, but it's not evidence, right? Like, it's not no reason to say such a thing. Okay.
I do think it's reason not to be definitive about it. I'm not saying it's reason that you can never talk about it. That I would never say. I think it's wrong to say you can't talk about this angle or consider it or weigh evidence accordingly. That's what I've been trying to do, call balls and strikes here. But I don't think it's evidence in the way that it's the most likely scenario so far. That could change. You know, presented with more evidence, I might change my view on that.
Let's be clear. So then it was kind of weird when Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted praying for Charlie Kirk at 3:02 p.m. Literally, he tweeted it before President Trump. It was like within a minute or two of the actual shooting. It was like right when it happened.
All right, this one is just not true, and I'm not accusing Ian of lying, but I looked into this one because other people had claimed this elsewhere. But the truth is that, and I'll show you guys here, the truth is that Netanyahu tweeted that he was praying for Charlie Kirk about an hour and 41 minutes after he was actually shot, according to the narrative, according to reports on the ground, and the timestamps are here. And just to double check this, I went back to those tweets and looked at it, and it did match up with what Grok is saying here. I know Grok is fallible. Sometimes it gives the wrong information, but it does seem like this was 1 hour and 41 minutes after he was actually shot, not within a minute or two of when he was shot. So had to correct Ian on that one. I think it's only fair to provide that clarification. And based on time zone differences and stuff, I can see how that could be confused or misinterpreted. So I'm not saying, you know, Ian's doing this for callous reasons, but I do think he's not correct on that one.
As though he all, like, that's so weird. That's super weird. And he's been super vocal about the whole thing and about how he's like blaming it on like Muslims and jihadists and radicalism. And it's like, dude, Iran didn't shoot Charlie Kirk. Calm down, Benji. Get the fuck out of our country. So like, that's weird. That's just weird, right? And it does not prove anything.
Well, hey, I'm with Ian on that last point. I mean, Iran did not shoot Charlie Kirk, that's for sure. And Benjamin Netanyahu asserting that it could be terrorists is equally implausible as some of the zaniest theories I've heard. But look, I tried to call balls and strikes on this one the best I can. I'm not sold. I'll just say I'm not sold that Charlie Kirk was turning away from Israel in the conventional sense at all. Maybe that could have been true to some extent behind the scenes if this unnamed source was correct. It seems like that's at least plausible. But again, I hope that source tells his family, because that might be the answer to his death. And man, I hope this doesn't become a new JFK. And, you know, 60 years later, we're getting the Charlie Kirk files from the FBI, heavily redacted, of course, heavily redacted. I hope that's not the case. But man, I just don't think this one adds up too much. I just don't. And I'm willing to be open about it. I'm willing to be persuaded otherwise with more information, things I don't have. If you have any, leave it in the comments down below. I'm willing to entertain the notion that we should at least ask these questions for a few reasons. One, I'm not convinced that he was turning against Israel. I think he said some fairly conventional things, even amongst, Zionists that don't exactly, have a problem with asking for the release of the Epstein files. I think Laura Loomer is one of those. I mean, I think she has excuses for the cover up, but she's asked that too. She's one of the most diehard Zionists in the world as well. And there's other examples too, but that's one of them. And then the other thing is I haven't seen any connections that people have made between this shooter and Israel presented at all. In fact, it doesn't seem like there's any connection at all. You could say his dad was a sheriff for a long time. He was in law enforcement for a long time. Looks like he was raised quasi-conservative, whether he turned, more woke or, leftist activist after that. I still think's a quasi-open question, at least based on some stuff online. But I haven't seen any clear-cut connection to Israel that he has. I'm not saying that's not possible, but you have to make that linkage. If you're going to say that the person in that film running off the roof, jumping off the roof, whatever questions you have about if he had the gun or whatever, I've seen it all right now. But you have to make the connection of how he was related to Israel if you're going to go with this narrative, I think. It behooves you to clarify that and not me to just speculate. So that's where I think we are. Balls and strikes here. It doesn't pass or withstand scrutiny to me. I'll admit there were a few things there, including Charlie Kirk talking about a possible Mossad relationship with Epstein that would change my thoughts a little bit. But the amalgam of evidence to me is not indicative of someone that was really turning away from Israel. This was a conventional conservative with conventional views, mostly in support of Israel, that had been, dealt a hand in which conservatives have started to slide away from just complete control and, support for Israel. We have seen that with many people. I think if Charlie engaged in that, it's not out of the norm, unless we're willing to say that Megyn Kelly is going to be the next to be offed. We don't know that. So this is a theory worth discussing. I just don't see it. I think it's implausible. And hey, you can call me a pro Netanyahu stooge if you want, that I'm a, Mossad asset myself for this, despite all the content that I produce that's very incendiary and critical of Israel if you want. But in this case, I'm just not seeing it. I reserve the right to change my opinion, but that's what I think about this. Let me know if you think I'm crazy, but I don't. I do want to hear what you think. Let me know down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Ian. Great podcast, Ian. Thanks for discussing it honestly, and at least considering this. I think, we can talk about this. This isn't a forbidden subject, no matter what they tell you. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel. And in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.